I am 52 years old, and I thought I knew my family. I thought I understood the difference between love and manipulation, between support and exploitation. I was wrong about everything. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and 3 months ago, I received a text message that saved my life. Not from cancer, not from a car accident, but from something far more insidious. Something that had been slowly killing me for decades without my even realizing it. The message came from an unknown number during what should have been a peaceful family dinner. 7 simple words that shattered everything I believed about the people who raised me. Get up and leave now. Do not say anything. I want you to imagine sitting at your childhood dining table, surrounded by the people who are supposed to love you most in this world. Your parents, your sister, the same cranberry juice you have been drinking since you were 8 years old. Everything familiar, everything safe. Now imagine discovering that every single one of them had conspired to drug you, rob you, and leave you unconscious on their living room couch. That is exactly what happened to me on a humid Thursday evening in Phoenix, Arizona. And if I had not received that warning text, if I had not listened to that voice telling me to run, I would have woken up the next morning completely broke, completely violated, and probably completely broken. But here is what makes this story even more disturbing. This was not some desperate last-minute decision. This was not a family in crisis, making a terrible choice in the heat of the moment. This was planned. This was calculated. This was 3 people I had loved and supported my entire life, deciding that I was worth more to them unconscious than conscious. The worst part, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, written in invisible ink across 30 years of family dinners, holiday gatherings, and phone calls that always seemed to end with someone needing money. Always me giving, always them taking. Always the promise that this time would be the last time. I spent 3 decades being the family ATM, the reliable one, the sister who never said no. I was the nurse who worked double shifts to pay for someone else's mistakes, the daughter who emptied her savings account because family comes first, right? The woman who believed that love meant never keeping score, even when the score was always 0 to 100. But that night, something inside me finally snapped awake. Maybe it was the text message. Maybe it was the look in my mother's eyes when she handed me that glass of juice. Or maybe it was just 30 years of being taken for granted, finally catching up with me. Whatever it was, it saved me from losing everything I had worked for, everything I had earned, everything I was. This is the story of how my own family tried to destroy me. And how I discovered that sometimes the most dangerous people in your life are the ones who claim to love you most. If you have ever felt like the family scapegoat, the one everyone turns to when they need something, then you need to hear this. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone. Some people are born with boundaries. I was born with a welcome mat stapled to my forehead. It started when I was 12 years old, standing in the kitchen of our small house in South Phoenix, while my mother counted crumpled dollar bills on the counter. My father had been laid off from the construction company again, and my younger sister Carmen needed money for a school field trip. $25 might as well have been $25,000 to our family back then. Maja, my mother said, not looking up from the bills. You have been saving your allowance. Yes. Carmen needs this for her class trip to the Science Museum. I had been saving. For 8 months, I had been putting aside every dollar from my allowance, every coin I found in the couch cushions, every birthday gift from relatives. I was saving for a bicycle, a beautiful red Schwinn I had seen at the department store. I had already picked out the exact model, already imagined myself riding it to school instead of walking the 2 miles in the desert heat. But Carmen was standing right there, shifting from foot to foot, her eyes wide and hopeful. She was 9 years old, and she believed in magic and field trips, in the possibility that the Science Museum might hold answers to questions she did not even know she had yet. How could I say no to that? Of course, Mommy, I said, and went to my bedroom to get the small metal box where I kept my money. $25. Gone. Just like that. Carmen hugged me so tight I could smell the strawberry shampoo in her hair. My parents smiled at me like I had just performed a miracle instead of a simple transaction. You are such a good sister, my father said. Such a generous heart. I never got that bicycle, but I got something else instead. I got a role, a purpose, an identity that would follow me for the next 40 years. I became the solution, the reliable one, the sister who could always be counted on to make everything okay. It was not malicious, not at first. My parents were not evil people plotting to exploit their older daughter. They were immigrants trying to make a life in a country that did not always welcome them, working jobs that barely paid enough to keep food on the table, raising 2 daughters while speaking a language that still felt foreign in their mouths, even after 20 years. But somewhere along the way, my generosity became an expectation. My willingness to help became an obligation. My love became a resource to be mined whenever someone else's plans fell through. When Carmen needed a prom dress, guess who had been working weekends at the local grocery store? When my father's truck broke down, guess who had been saving for her own car? When my mother wanted to send money to her sister in Mexico, guess who had just received her first paycheck from her job at the hospital cafeteria? Every single time I said yes. Every single time I told myself it was temporary. Every single time I believed them when they said they would pay me back. They never did. By the time I graduated high school, I had given my family more than $3,000. Money I had earned folding clothes, stocking shelves, and serving mashed potatoes to patients who could not feed themselves. Money that should have gone toward my nursing school tuition, my own dreams, my own future. Instead, it went toward everyone else's emergencies, everyone else's needs, everyone else's dreams. And I told myself I was being a good daughter, a good sister, a good person. College should have been my escape. 4 years in Tucson, 200 miles away from the constant requests, the guilt-laden phone calls, the expectation that Elena would always fix whatever was broken. I was going to study nursing, build a career, create a life that belonged to me. I lasted exactly 3 weeks before the phone calls started. My mother's voice would crackle through the cheap dorm phone, full of warmth and concern about how I was eating, whether I was happy if I missed home. For a brief, naive moment, I thought she was just checking in, just being a loving mother, worried about her daughter living away from home for the first time. Then would come the pause, the slight shift in tone that I should have recognized by now, but somehow never did. Carmen was struggling in her senior year, my mother would explain. The stress was overwhelming her. Her guidance counselor insisted she needed tutoring for math class, or she might not graduate. But tutoring cost $80 a week, money they simply did not have. I was eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. I was working 20 hours at the campus bookstore just to afford my textbooks. I had exactly $237 in my checking account money I needed for next month's meal plan. But I found myself asking how much she needed anyway. $320. Gone. Transferred from my account to theirs before I could think too hard about what it meant for my own budget. Carmen passed her math class. I spent the next month eating peanut butter sandwiches and telling myself it was worth it. That became the pattern for the next 4 years. Every semester brought a new crisis, a new emergency that only I could solve. My father's diabetes medication was not covered by insurance. Carmen needed money for senior pictures, for graduation announcements, for a dress for awards night. My mother's hours at the hotel were cut. There was always something, and I always said yes. By my junior year, I had given them over $8,000. Money I earned cleaning office buildings at 5 in the morning before my classes started. Money I made working double shifts at the campus medical center, changing bedpans and helping elderly patients who reminded me of my own grandparents. Money that should have been building my future was constantly flowing backward toward a family that had somehow convinced me that my success was meaningless unless I shared every penny of it. The worst part was not the money itself. It was the way they asked for it. Never directly, never from Carmen herself. Always through my parents, always wrapped in layers of guilt and manipulation that felt like love but tasted like poison. They would remind me that Carmen was too embarrassed to ask me herself, that she knew how hard I worked, that family was all we had, and money comes and goes, but family is forever. When I graduated nursing school, I thought things would change. I thought having a real career, a real salary, would somehow shift the dynamic. I thought they would finally see me as an adult, as someone with my own dreams and needs and financial responsibilities. Instead, my first paycheck just made me a bigger target. My grandmother Elena died on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 6 months before everything fell apart. She was 93 years old, sharp as a surgical scalpel, until the very end, and the only person in my family who had ever told me it was okay to keep my money for myself. Abuela Elena had immigrated from Sonora with nothing but a suitcase and a fierce determination to build something better for her children. She worked as a seamstress for 40 years, saving every penny she could spare, investing in small properties around Phoenix when no one else believed the desert would ever bloom into a city. When the lawyer called to tell me about the will, I was sitting in my small apartment after a 12-hour shift in the ICU, too tired to even take off my scrubs. The inheritance was $85,000. Not life-changing money by some standards, but more than I had ever seen in one place in my entire life. For the first time in my adult life, I had a cushion, security, the possibility of buying a house, of taking a vacation, of not checking my bank balance before every grocery trip. I felt something I had not experienced since I was 12 years old, the luxury of choice. I made the mistake of sharing the news with my family. Within hours of telling them about the inheritance, my phone was buzzing with congratulations that felt more like calculations. My mother called to say how proud Abuela would have been, how she had always known I was destined for good things. My father sent a rare text message about family blessings and God's providence. Carmen left a voicemail that managed to sound both excited for me and slightly resentful at the same time. But it was the follow-up conversations that revealed their true intentions. My mother began talking about how expensive it was getting to maintain their house, how the roof needed repairs that insurance would not cover. She would mention it casually, as if she was just sharing information, not planting seeds. The air conditioning unit was making strange noises. The plumbing in the guest bathroom had been acting up for months. Nothing urgent, nothing that required immediate attention, but everything expensive enough to chip away at my newfound security. Carmen's approach was more direct. She started inviting me to lunch, something she had never done before, and would spend the entire meal talking about her struggles in real estate. The market was tough, she would explain. Interest rates were making it impossible for first-time buyers to qualify for loans. Her commissions had dropped by 60% over the past year. She was barely making enough to cover her car payment. My father took the philosophical route, talking about how money was a tool meant to be used, not hoarded. How Abuela would have wanted her legacy to help the entire family, not just one person. How the inheritance was really a gift to all of us, a way for our grandmother's hard work to continue blessing her descendants. None of them asked directly. They were too smart for that, too practiced in the art of manipulation, through guilt and obligation. Instead, they circled around the money like vultures, waiting for the right moment to make their move, expecting me to volunteer my windfall, just like I had volunteered everything else for the past 30 years. But something had changed in me since Abuela's death. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was finally having enough money to feel secure, or maybe it was just exhaustion from decades of being everyone else's solution. For the first time in my life, I was not automatically calculating how to share what I had. The truth about Carmen's real problem came out 3 months after Abuela's funeral, and it was not struggling real estate commissions or a tough housing market. It was much worse than any of us had imagined. I discovered it by accident during what should have been a routine sister lunch at our usual spot near her office. Carmen had been unusually quiet picking at her salad and checking her phone every few minutes with the kind of nervous energy that made my nurse instincts kick in. Something was wrong, something bigger than slow home sales or difficult clients. When she excused herself to take a call, she left her phone face up on the table. That is when I saw the notifications flooding her screen. Not from real estate apps or client messages, but from something called Desert Nights Casino and Phoenix Poker Palace. Dozens of them. Withdrawal confirmations, deposit alerts, bonus credit notifications, all time-stamped throughout the day and night. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. When Carmen returned to the table, her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. She sat down heavily like someone who had just received devastating news, and for a moment, I thought maybe a family member was sick or she had lost a major client. Then she started talking, and I realized the situation was much more personal than that. She had started playing online poker during the pandemic, she explained. Just small games at first, $5 or $10 buy-ins, to pass the time when the real estate market completely shut down. It was social, she said. It gave her something to do when she could not show houses or meet with clients. It made her feel connected to other people when the whole world felt isolated and scary. But small games became bigger games. $10 became $50, then $100, then $500. The occasional evening entertainment became nightly sessions that stretched until 3 in the morning. The social aspect disappeared entirely as she chased losses with bigger bets, convinced that the next hand would be the one to turn everything around. By the time she realized she had a problem, she was $23,000 in debt. $23,000 she did not have borrowed against credit cards and a home equity line she had taken out without telling anyone. Money she owed to people who were not patient with late payments, who charged interest rates that made credit card companies look generous, who had made it very clear what would happen if she did not pay up soon. Her real estate license was in jeopardy because financial problems could be grounds for professional discipline in her field. Her credit was destroyed. Her marriage to Diego had imploded 6 months earlier when he discovered the extent of her gambling and the lies she had told to cover it up. She was facing the possibility of losing her house, her career, and any chance of rebuilding her life. And she needed my help. Not the kind of help that involved career advice or emotional support or finding a good therapist who specialized in addiction. She needed $23,000 and she needed it fast. The inheritance from Abuela suddenly made perfect sense. This was not about roof repairs or air conditioning units or helping the family. This was about saving Carmen from the consequences of her own choices. For 39 years, I had never said no to my family when they needed money. Not once. Not even when saying yes meant I could not pay my own bills, could not buy groceries, could not afford the things I needed for my own life. The word simply did not exist in my vocabulary when it came to Carmen, my parents, or anyone else who shared my blood. But sitting in that restaurant, listening to my sister explain how she had gambled away more money than I made in 6 months, something inside me finally cracked. Maybe it was the casual way she presented her crisis, as if losing $23,000 to online poker was just an unfortunate accident that required a simple solution. Maybe it was realizing that all those conversations about struggling real estate sales had been elaborate lies designed to make me feel sorry for her. Or maybe it was finally understanding that my inheritance was not seen as my good fortune, but as the family's emergency fund. Whatever it was, when Carmen finished her explanation and looked at me with those expectant eyes that said she knew I would fix this, like I had fixed everything else, I heard myself saying something that shocked us both. I told her no. Not, maybe not. Let me think about it. Not, I need to see what I can do. Just no. A complete sentence that hung in the air between us like a foreign language neither of us had ever heard before. Carmen's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion first, as if she had not heard me correctly. Then disbelief, as if I had just told her I was planning to fly to the moon. Finally, anger, the kind of righteous indignation that comes from having your expectations completely shattered. She reminded me that she was my sister, my only sister, and that family was supposed to help family. She pointed out that I had the money, now that $23,000 was less than a third of my inheritance, that it would not even really hurt me to lose it. She explained that this was not like the other times when she had asked for small amounts for relatively minor things. This was serious. This could ruin her life. I listened to all of it, every guilt-laden argument and emotional manipulation she could summon, and I still said no. She asked me if I had become one of those people who cared more about money than family. She wondered aloud what had happened to the Elena who had always been there for everyone, who had always put other people's needs ahead of her own. She suggested that maybe Abuela's money had changed me into someone she did not recognize. I told her she was right. The money had changed me, not into someone greedy or selfish, but into someone who finally understood the difference between helping and enabling, between love and exploitation, between being generous and being used. The lunch ended badly. Carmen left without finishing her food or saying goodbye, and I sat alone at the table for another 20 minutes, shaking from adrenaline and the weight of what I had just done. That night, my parents called. Carmen had told them about our conversation, about my refusal to help, about how cold and heartless I had become since receiving the inheritance. They were disappointed in me, they said, hurt that I would abandon my own sister in her time of greatest need. The silence that followed lasted 3 weeks. No phone calls, no text messages, no invitations to Sunday dinner, or holiday planning, or casual check-ins. Complete radio silence, as if I had been erased from the family entirely. 3 weeks of silence from my family felt like living in an alternate universe. No good morning texts from my mother, no random memes forwarded by my father, no updates about Carmen's life, or work, or weekend plans. The quiet was so complete, it felt deliberately crafted, like a punishment designed to make me understand exactly what I had lost by saying no. At first, I told myself I was relieved. No more requests for money disguised as casual conversation. No more guilt trips about being selfish with my inheritance. No more feeling like an ATM with legs every time my phone rang. For the first time in decades, my bank account stayed exactly where I left it from week to week. But the silence also felt like grief. These were the people who had raised me, who had been part of every major moment in my life, who knew all my stories and shared all my memories. Cutting them off felt like amputating a limb that had been causing me pain, but was still fundamentally part of who I was. So when my mother's text message appeared on my phone on a Thursday afternoon in July, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension that made my hand shake as I read it. The message was simple and warm, as if the past 3 weeks had never happened. She missed me, she said. The house felt empty without my visits. Would I like to come for dinner on Sunday? Nothing fancy, just family time. Carmen would be there too. Maybe it was time to put the past behind us and remember what really mattered. I stared at that message for hours, reading and rereading it, trying to decode what it really meant. Was this an apology? An olive branch? A genuine attempt at reconciliation? Or was it something else entirely? Another strategy in a game I was only beginning to understand. My rational mind, the part of me that had been trained to assess situations and make careful decisions, was screaming warnings. People do not usually change their fundamental patterns overnight. A family that had spent 30 years treating me like their personal bank account did not suddenly develop respect for my boundaries just because I had said no once. But my heart, the part of me that still remembered being 12 years old and desperate for my parents' approval, wanted desperately to believe that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they had spent those 3 weeks thinking about our relationship, realizing how much they had taken me for granted, understanding that love should not come with a price tag. Maybe Carmen had figured out another way to handle her gambling debts. Maybe my parents had come to terms with the fact that my inheritance was mine to keep. Maybe they missed me for reasons that had nothing to do with my bank account. I wanted to believe in redemption stories, in second chances, in the possibility that families could change. I wanted to believe that underneath all the financial manipulation and emotional blackmail, there was still genuine love worth salvaging. So I texted back that I would be there, that I missed them too, that I was looking forward to Sunday dinner. I should have trusted my rational mind instead of my hopeful heart. Diego Martinez had been part of our family for 8 years before Carmen's gambling destroyed their marriage. He was the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday, who showed up early to help set up for parties and stayed late to help clean up, who treated my parents like his own and never made Carmen choose between him and her family. When their divorce was finalized 6 months earlier, I thought I would never see him again. Carmen had made it clear that maintaining relationships with her ex-husband was a betrayal of family loyalty, and my parents had reluctantly agreed that it was probably better to make a clean break. Diego had respected that decision and disappeared from our lives as quietly as he had entered them. So when my phone rang at 6:30 on Sunday evening, just as I was getting ready to leave for dinner, and his name appeared on my screen, I almost did not answer. I was already running late, already anxious about seeing my family for the first time in 3 weeks, already second-guessing my decision to accept their invitation. But something in my gut told me to pick up the call. Diego's voice sounded strained, like he had been arguing with himself about whether to make this phone call for hours. He asked where I was, whether I was still planning to go to dinner at my parents' house, whether I had left yet. When I told him I was just heading out the door, he told me to stop, to sit down, to listen very carefully to what he was about to tell me. He had been at his apartment that afternoon when Carmen showed up unexpectedly. She still had a key left over from when they were married, and she had let herself in while he was taking a shower. By the time he realized she was there, she was already digging through his desk drawers, looking for something. When he confronted her, she broke down completely. The gambling debts were not just still a problem, they were getting worse. The people she owed money to had started making threats, not just about her finances, but about her physical safety. She was desperate, terrified, and running out of options. That is when she told him about the plan. It had been my mother's idea, apparently. Carmen had confessed everything to our parents after our lunch 3 weeks earlier, not just about the gambling, but about the people she owed money to and what they had threatened to do if she did not pay up soon. Instead of being horrified by what their daughter had gotten herself into, they had started brainstorming solutions. The inheritance was the obvious answer. $85,000 was more than enough to pay off Carmen's debts and give the family some breathing room. The only problem was convincing me to share it, something I had already proven I was unwilling to do voluntarily. So they had developed a different approach. Diego's voice dropped to almost a whisper as he explained what Carmen had told him. They were planning to drug me at dinner, something that would make me unconscious, but not obviously sick. Once I was out, they would use my fingerprint to unlock my phone and transfer money from my accounts to theirs. When I woke up, I would assume I had simply had too much to drink and blacked out, never realizing that anything had been stolen. Carmen had been researching how much alcohol it would take to make someone my size pass out, what other substances might work better, how long the effects would last. She had been planning this for weeks. After Diego's call ended, I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 20 minutes, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every rational cell in my body was screaming at me to turn around, go back upstairs, lock my door, and pretend this dinner invitation had never happened. But I also knew that if I did not go, I would spend the rest of my life wondering if Diego had been telling the truth. Maybe he was bitter about the divorce. Maybe he was trying to cause problems between Carmen and the family out of spite. Maybe his story was just the fantasy of an angry ex-husband who wanted to paint his former wife as a monster. I needed to know for sure. More than that, I needed evidence. If my family really was planning to drug and rob me, I could not just take Diego's word for it. I needed proof, something that would hold up if this situation escalated beyond family drama into something that required outside intervention. So I made a decision that probably saved my financial life and possibly my actual life. I drove to my parents' house, but I did not go in unprepared. First, I stopped at a convenience store and bought a small bottle of water, which I drank completely and then refilled with tap water from the bathroom sink. If they were planning to drug my drink, I wanted to have something clean to compare it to later. Then I did something I had never done before in my entire life. I activated the voice recording app on my phone, set it to run continuously in the background, and slipped the phone into my purse in a position where the microphone would not be blocked. If they really were planning what Diego said they were planning, I was going to capture every word of it. Walking up to my parents' front door felt like approaching a crime scene where the crime had not happened yet. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. The same desert landscaping my father had spent years perfecting, the same wind chimes my mother had hung from the front porch, the same welcome mat that said, "Bienvenidos" in faded letters. But now I was seeing it all through different eyes, looking for signs of deception or danger that I had been blind to for 39 years. My mother answered the door with a smile that seemed too bright, too rehearsed, like she had been practicing it in the mirror. She hugged me tighter than usual and held on longer than felt natural, as if she was either genuinely sorry for the 3 weeks of silence or overcompensating for the guilt of what she was about to do. My father was waiting in the living room, and he stood up when I entered with that same hesitant energy I remembered from every awkward family gathering. But tonight, his smile seemed forced, his hug perfunctory, his entire demeanor that of a man who was acting out a role rather than genuinely welcoming his daughter home. Carmen was already at the dining room table, scrolling through her phone with studied casualness. She looked up when I entered, offered a small wave that might have been friendly or might have been guilty, and immediately returned her attention to her screen. And there, next to my usual seat, was a glass of cranberry juice. The cranberry juice sat there like a loaded weapon disguised as hospitality. The same glass I had been drinking from since childhood, filled with the same deep red liquid that had been my preferred beverage at every family gathering for as long as I could remember. Under normal circumstances, I would have picked it up without a second thought and drained half of it before even sitting down. But these were not normal circumstances, and I was not the same naive woman who had been reflexively saying yes to every family request for the past 3 decades. I sat down carefully, acknowledging the juice with a nod, but not touching it. My mother immediately launched into cheerful chatter about how good it was to have the family together again, how she had missed our Sunday dinners, how nothing felt right when one of us was missing. Her voice had that overly bright quality that people use when they are trying too hard to seem normal. My father joined the conversation with equally forced enthusiasm, asking about my work at the hospital, whether I was still enjoying the ICU, if I had any vacation plans coming up. Surface-level questions from a man who had never shown much interest in the details of my career before, delivered with the kind of attention that felt more like surveillance than genuine curiosity. Carmen remained mostly quiet, occasionally looking up from her phone to smile or nod, but contributing very little to the conversation. Every few minutes, she would glance at my glass, then at me, then back to her phone, with an expression I could not quite read. Anticipation, maybe, or anxiety about whether their plan was going to work. My mother had prepared all my childhood favorites. Chicken with the spice blend she had learned from my grandmother, roasted potatoes, with garlic and cilantro, green beans cooked until they were soft and infused with the flavors of onion and tomato. Under different circumstances, it would have been a gesture of love, a peace offering, designed to remind me of all the good times we had shared around this table. Tonight, it felt like the last meal before an execution. They kept waiting for me to drink the juice. Not obviously, not in a way that would seem suspicious to someone who did not know what I knew, but I could feel their attention shifting to that glass every few minutes. My mother would pause mid-sentence and glance at it. My father would ask if I needed anything to drink, as if the full glass sitting right in front of me had somehow become invisible. Carmen would look up from her phone whenever I reached for my napkin or my fork, clearly expecting me to reach for the glass instead. 20 minutes into dinner, I could see them starting to get nervous. I was eating normally, participating in conversation, acting like everything was fine, but I had not touched the one thing they needed me to consume for their plan to work. So I picked up the glass, tilted it slightly toward my lips, and took what appeared to be a small sip, just enough to wet my lips and create the illusion that I was drinking, but not enough to actually consume whatever they had put in it. The reaction was immediate and telling. My mother visibly relaxed her shoulders, dropping from the tense position they had been holding all evening. My father's forced smile became slightly more genuine. Carmen looked up from her phone and actually joined the conversation for the first time since I had arrived. They thought their plan was working. They thought I was beginning to ingest whatever substance they had mixed into that innocent-looking glass of cranberry juice. They had no idea that I was 3 steps ahead of them, recording every word and planning my own performance. The hardest part was not pretending to drink the spiked juice or acting like I was getting drowsy. The hardest part was listening to my own family coordinate my assault with the casual efficiency of people planning a weekend barbecue. 30 minutes after my fake sip, I began the performance of my life. I started by rubbing my temples and mentioning that I felt a bit lightheaded, probably just tired from a long week at work. My mother immediately expressed concern, asking if I needed to lie down, if I wanted some water, if maybe I should rest on the couch for a few minutes. The solicitude in her voice would have been touching if I had not known it was entirely calculated. I let them guide me to the living room sofa, the same couch where I had taken naps during family gatherings as a child, where I had recovered from wisdom tooth surgery when I was 22, where I had curled up with blankets during countless movie nights over the years. Now it was the stage for the final act of our family relationship. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing slowly and evenly, the way unconscious people breathe, while listening to my family discuss me like I was already gone. My mother's voice came first, barely above a whisper, but clear enough for my phone to capture. Was I really asleep? How could they be sure? What if I woke up in the middle of what they were planning to do? Carmen's response was confident in a way that made my skin crawl. She had researched this extensively, she assured them. The combination of substances she had used would keep someone my size unconscious for at least 2 hours, maybe 3. I would not remember anything when I woke up, just that I had felt tired and decided to take a nap. My father's voice was the most chilling because it carried no guilt, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that what they were about to do was a crime. He simply wanted to know how much time they had and whether they should get started. I heard footsteps crossing the room, then felt my phone being carefully lifted from my purse. The device that was recording their every word was now in their hands, and they had no idea they were creating evidence of their own guilt with every sentence they spoke. The sound of my fingerprint unlock was soft but distinct. Then came the quiet celebration as they gained access to my banking apps, my financial information, everything I had worked decades to accumulate. My mother's voice again reading numbers aloud. Account balances, available credit, recent transactions. They were taking inventory of my entire financial life, like shoppers making a list at the grocery store. Carmen's voice was businesslike as she navigated through my apps, looking for the easiest way to transfer money without triggering security alerts. She had clearly spent time studying my banking habits, understanding my patterns, figuring out how to steal from me in a way that would look normal to fraud detection systems. The actual theft attempt took less than 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes felt like watching my own family dig my grave while I was still breathing. What my family did not know about me could fill a library. But the most important thing they had overlooked was exactly how I had spent the last 15 years of my nursing career, while they saw me as Elena the caregiver, Elena the family, ATM, Elena, the woman who said yes to everything I had actually been working in healthcare information technology for over a decade. I was not just changing bedpans and checking vital signs anymore. I was managing electronic medical records, implementing cybersecurity protocols, and helping hospitals protect patient data from exactly the kind of theft my own family was attempting. I knew more about digital security, biometric authentication, and financial fraud prevention than they could have imagined in their wildest dreams. So when Diego had called to warn me about their plan, I had not just prepared to record their conversation. I had spent 3 hours that afternoon turning my phone and my financial accounts into the digital equivalent of a police sting operation. The fingerprint unlock they were so proud of accessing, I had left that exactly as it was because I wanted them to feel successful, to believe their plan was working, to keep talking and incriminating themselves while my phone recorded everything. But every single one of my financial apps had been equipped with additional security measures they would never see coming. 2-factor authentication that required not just my fingerprint, but also verification codes sent to a secondary device they did not have access to. Biometric locks that would trigger if the phone detected it was being held by unfamiliar hands. Transaction limits that would prevent any transfer over $500 without additional authorization. Geographic restrictions that would flag any banking activity taking place outside my usual locations. Even if they managed to navigate past all of those obstacles, every attempted transaction would generate automatic alerts sent to both my work email and a secondary phone number, creating a digital paper trail that would be impossible to deny or delete. But the most elegant part of my trap was something they would never even notice. Banking apps keep detailed logs of every action taken within them. Every screen accessed, every button pressed, every failed attempt to move money. Those logs include timestamps that would match perfectly with the audio recording my phone was capturing of their voices. As I lay on that couch, pretending to be unconscious, I could hear the frustration growing in their voices as they encountered security measure after security measure. Carmen's confident tone from 20 minutes earlier was replaced by increasingly frantic whispers as she realized that stealing from someone who understood technology was much more complicated than she had anticipated. My father's voice carried a note of panic as he suggested they give up, put the phone back, and pretend this had never happened. But Carmen was insistent that they keep trying, that there had to be a way around the security measures, that they were so close to solving her gambling problem. My mother's voice was the voice of someone watching a plan fall apart in real time. She kept asking if they were sure I was still unconscious, if they were being too loud, if maybe they should stop before they got caught. But they kept trying for another 10 minutes, generating more evidence, with every failed attempt creating a digital record that would be impossible to explain away as anything other than deliberate theft. When they finally gave up and put my phone back in my purse, they had just handed me everything I needed to destroy them. The performance had to continue even after they had given up on their theft attempt. I could not just suddenly wake up alert and ready to leave. I had to sell the illusion that I had genuinely been unconscious, that I had no idea what had just transpired in my own family's living room. So I waited another 20 minutes, listening to them clean up the evidence of their failed crime. They moved around the room quietly, putting things back where they belonged, disposing of whatever they had used to spike my drink, probably rehearsing the story they would tell about how I had simply gotten tired and taken a nap during dinner. When I finally stirred and opened my eyes, they were all sitting in their chairs like nothing had happened. My mother immediately rushed over with fake concern, asking how I was feeling, whether I needed anything, if I remembered getting dizzy during dinner. I played my part perfectly, confused about how long I had been sleeping, slightly embarrassed about passing out during family time, grateful for their concern and care. I mentioned that I felt foggy and disoriented, which gave them visible relief because it meant their drugging attempt had at least partially worked, even if their theft attempt had failed. They offered to let me stay overnight to make sure I was really okay before driving home. The concern in their voices might have been touching if I had not known it was motivated by guilt rather than genuine care for my well-being. But I declined, insisting that I felt fine enough to drive, that I just needed to get home to my own bed. The truth was that I needed to get away from them before my acting skills failed me, before the rage I was feeling broke through the calm facade I had been maintaining for the past 3 hours. The goodbye hugs were the hardest part. My mother held me tight and told me she loved me, and for a split second, I almost believed she meant it. My father patted my back in that awkward way he had always shown affection, and I could smell the familiar scent of his aftershave that had comforted me as a child. Carmen's hug was brief, but included a whispered apology for our fight 3 weeks earlier, as if the money disagreement was the biggest problem between us. Standing in that doorway, hugging the people who had raised me, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never see them again. Not by choice anyway. Whatever happened next, whether it involved police or lawyers or criminal charges, this was the end of our family relationship. The drive home took 15 minutes, but it felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. The world where I was still Elena, the people pleaser, Elena. The family caretaker, Elena. The woman who always said yes. And the world where I was Elena, the crime victim, Elena. The woman with evidence, Elena. The person who was about to make choices that would change everything. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I had already decided what I was going to do with the recording on my phone. I was going to use it. Monday morning arrived gray and humid, typical for Phoenix in late July, but I woke up feeling clearer than I had in months. There was something liberating about finally knowing the truth, about having concrete evidence, Instead of just suspicions and hurt feelings about being able to take action, instead of just absorbing whatever my family decided to do to me. I called in sick to work, which was not entirely a lie, since I felt emotionally nauseated every time I thought about what had happened the night before. Then I spent 2 hours organizing my evidence, making copies of the audio recording, printing out screenshots of my banking app logs, and preparing a timeline of events that would make sense to someone who did not know my family's 30-year history of financial manipulation. The Phoenix Police Department building on Washington Street looked exactly like what it was, a fortress designed to intimidate people who were already having the worst day of their lives. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, air conditioning blasting, trying to work up the courage to walk inside and officially transform my family members from relatives into criminal defendants. The desk sergeant was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who listened patiently as I explained that I needed to file a report about attempted theft and assault. When I clarified that the perpetrators were my parents and sister, her expression shifted from routine professionalism to genuine concern. She directed me to a small interview room where Detective Maria Santos, a woman about my age with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, asked me to start from the beginning and tell her everything that had happened. I played the audio recording first, watching Detective Santos's face change as she heard my family casually discussing how to drug me, unlock my phone, and steal my money. The sound quality was surprisingly clear, good enough to distinguish individual voices, good enough to capture the calculating tone of their conversation, good enough to use as evidence in court. Then I showed her the banking app logs, the security measures I had put in place, the failed transaction attempts that corresponded exactly with the timestamps on the audio recording. I walked her through my background in healthcare IT, explaining how I had anticipated their plan and turned it against them. Detective Santos asked thoughtful questions about my family history, about previous instances of financial manipulation, about whether this appeared to be an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. She seemed particularly interested in the fact that they had researched how to drug me, specifically that this was not a spontaneous crime, but something they had planned for weeks. When I finished my statement, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with the kind of expression cops probably reserve for cases that are both straightforward and heartbreaking. She explained that what my family had done constituted multiple felonies, criminal conspiracy since they had planned it together, assault since they had drugged me without my consent, attempted theft since they had tried to steal my money, identity theft since they had used my biometric information without permission. The evidence was strong enough to file charges immediately, she said. The recording was clear, the digital evidence was compelling, and my testimony was consistent and credible. If I wanted to press charges, she could have warrants issued by the end of the week. I told her yes. I wanted to press charges. I wanted all of them held accountable for what they had done to me. The arrests happened on a Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., exactly 1 week after the dinner that destroyed our family forever. I was not there to see it, but Detective Santos called me afterward to let me know that all 3 warrants had been executed without incident. My parents had been taken into custody at their house, still in their pajamas and bathrobes. Carmen had been arrested at her apartment, where she had apparently been packing boxes as if she was planning to leave town. The phone calls started before noon. My mother was the first to call from the county jail, her voice shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief that I had actually gone through with filing charges against my own family. She could not understand how I could do this to them, how I could destroy everything over money, how I could be so cold and calculating and cruel. There was no apology in her voice, no acknowledgement of what they had done to me, no recognition that drugging in robbing someone was a crime, regardless of whether the victim was a stranger or a daughter. Just anger that I had refused to quietly absorb their abuse the way I had been doing for 30 years. My father's call came an hour later, after he had been released on his own recognizance. His voice was different than I had ever heard it before, hollow and defeated, like someone who had just realized that actions have consequences, even when you are dealing with family members who have always forgiven everything in the past. He wanted to know if there was anything he could say, anything he could do, any way to make this whole situation disappear. He suggested that maybe we could handle this privately, within the family, without involving lawyers and judges and court dates. He reminded me that criminal charges would ruin their reputations, make it impossible for Carmen to work in real estate, create problems that would follow them for years. I listened to his entire plea without saying a word, then told him that they should have thought about consequences before they decided to drug and rob me. Then I hung up. Carmen's voicemail came last recorded sometime after she had been released on bail. Her voice was different too, not angry, like my mother's, or defeated, like my father's, but calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. She was already thinking about damage control, about how to minimize the charges, about what story they could tell that would make this look like a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate crime. She suggested that maybe I had overreacted, that maybe the recording was not as clear as I thought it was, that maybe a good lawyer could argue that their conversation had been taken out of context. She reminded me that families fight sometimes, that people say things they do not mean when they are desperate, that destroying each other in court was not going to solve anyone's problems. But what struck me most about her message was what she did not say. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no recognition that they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Just strategic thinking about how to escape responsibility for what they had done. I saved all 3 messages, added them to my evidence file, and blocked their numbers. The legal process moved faster than I had expected, probably because the evidence was so overwhelming that plea negotiations started almost immediately. When you have a clear audio recording of people planning and attempting to commit multiple felonies, defense attorneys do not waste time arguing about innocence. They focus on damage control. Carmen's lawyer contacted the prosecutor first within 2 weeks of the arrests. She was willing to plead guilty to conspiracy and attempted theft in exchange for dropping the assault charges related to drugging me. Her main concern was not avoiding prison time, which was unlikely for a first offense anyway, but protecting her real estate license and avoiding a felony conviction that would end her career permanently. My parents' attorneys followed suit, negotiating similar plea deals that would result in probation, community service, and restitution rather than jail time. The prosecutor explained to me that this was typical for nonviolent first offenses, especially when the defendant showed remorse and willingness to make amends. But that was the problem. None of them showed genuine remorse. During the sentencing hearing, I had the opportunity to give a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium in that sterile courtroom, looking at my family sitting at the defendant's table with their lawyers, and tried to explain to the judge what it felt like to discover that the people who were supposed to love you most in the world had been planning to drug and rob you. I talked about 30 years of financial manipulation, about being trained from childhood to believe that my value to the family was measured entirely by my willingness to give them money. I talked about the inheritance from my grandmother that was supposed to give me security, but instead made me a target. I talked about the dinner invitation that I had hoped was an olive branch, but was actually a trap. Most importantly, I talked about the recording about lying on that couch, listening to my own mother, father, and sister coordinate my assault with the casual efficiency of people who had done this kind of thing before, or at least thought about it enough to have a plan. The judge sentenced them each to 18 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and joint restitution of $5,000 to cover my therapy costs and legal fees. No jail time, but felony convictions that would follow them permanently. Carmen lost her real estate license within a month of the sentencing. The state licensing board does not allow people with fraud convictions to work in financial services, regardless of the circumstances or whether the crime was committed against family members. Her career was over, just like she had feared when she first confessed her gambling problem to me. My parents lost something different, but equally valuable. Their standing in the community, their reputation at church, their relationships with extended family members who could not understand how they could have done something so terrible to their own daughter. The whispers followed them everywhere they went in their small social circle. But the most significant consequence was something none of us had anticipated. The house they had lived in for 25 years, the house where I had grown up, where we had shared thousands of meals and celebrations and ordinary family moments, had to be sold to pay for their legal fees and Carmen's gambling debts. The American dream my immigrant grandparents had built, the stability my parents had worked their entire lives to create, was gone. All of it sacrificed for a plan to steal money from their own daughter. The first thing I did after the court proceedings ended was change my phone number. Not just to avoid calls from my family, but to symbolically close the door on a version of myself that had spent 4 decades being available to solve everyone else's problems. The new number went to exactly 3 people: my supervisor at work, my closest friend Sarah, and my therapist. Dr. Rebecca Chen specialized in family trauma and financial abuse, 2 areas of expertise I had not even known existed until I started researching therapists who could help me process what had happened. Our first session was mostly me crying while trying to explain how my own parents had drugged me. But by our 5th session, I was beginning to understand patterns that had been invisible to me for my entire adult life. The guilt was the hardest part to overcome. Even with clear evidence that my family had committed crimes against me, even with their felony convictions and the audio recording of them planning to rob me, I still felt like maybe I had overreacted. Maybe I should have found a way to handle it privately. Maybe sending my own parents to court was crueler than what they had done to me. Dr. Chen helped me understand that this guilt was itself a symptom of the abuse I had endured for decades. I had been conditioned from childhood to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own safety, to minimize my own pain, in service of family harmony, to believe that my needs were less important than everyone else's wants. Learning to live without that constant background noise of family obligation was like recovering from a chronic illness I had not realized was making me sick. For the first time in my adult life, my weekends belonged to me. My paycheck was mine to spend on my own priorities. My phone did not ring with emergencies that somehow always required my immediate financial intervention. I started small. I bought groceries without calculating whether I could afford to help someone else that month. I booked a weekend trip to Sedona without asking permission or explaining my decision to anyone. I opened a savings account specifically for things I wanted, rather than things other people needed. The loneliness was real, especially during holidays and family occasions I had spent 39 years attending automatically. But it was clean loneliness, honest loneliness, not the complicated emotional exhaustion of loving people who saw me primarily as a resource to be exploited. I made new traditions. Thanksgiving dinner with Sarah and her husband, who had become surrogate family after learning what my biological family had done to me. Christmas morning, volunteering at the hospital, working with patients who had nowhere else to go. People who understood what it meant to build chosen family from kindness rather than obligation. My apartment became a sanctuary instead of just a place to sleep between shifts and family crises. I bought plants that no one could kill while I was away helping someone else. I hung pictures that no one could criticize. I played music that no one could complain was too loud. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself, and it felt revolutionary. 2 years have passed since that dinner changed everything, and I want to share what I have learned, because I know I am not the only person who has lived this story. If you are watching this and recognizing your own family in my experience, if you are the one everyone turns to when they need money, if you are exhausted from being the solution to everyone else's problems, then this message is for you. The hardest truth I had to accept was that my family never loved me for who I was. They loved me for what I could provide. The moment I stopped being useful, the moment I said no to their financial demands, they were willing to drug and rob me rather than respect my boundaries. That was not love. That was exploitation disguised as family obligation. But here is what I want you to understand. And this took me months of therapy to really believe setting boundaries does not make you selfish. Protecting your own financial security does not make you greedy. Refusing to enable someone else's destructive behavior does not make you cruel. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction. I know that cutting off family feels impossible when you are in the middle of it. I know the guilt feels overwhelming. I know that everyone around you will tell you that family is forever, that you should forgive and forget, that money is not worth destroying relationships over. But those people were not lying unconscious on a couch while their own parents planned to rob them. Some relationships are worth fighting for. Some family bonds are worth preserving, despite conflicts and disappointments. But some situations are too toxic, too dangerous, too fundamentally broken to repair. Learning to tell the difference might be the most important skill any of us ever develops. Today, I live in a house I bought with my grandmother's inheritance, the money my family tried to steal from me. I have friends who love me for who I am not what I can give them. I have peace, real peace, for the first time in my adult life. And I have zero regret about the choices I made to protect myself. If my story sounds familiar, if you are living with family members who see you as an ATM rather than a person, please know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation. You deserve to keep the money you earn. You deserve to say no without being punished for it. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where family loyalty was used to manipulate you? Have you had to make the difficult choice between protecting yourself and keeping the peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about surviving toxic family dynamics. Remember, choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival.